In this episode of Beyond at Home, we're going to be talking about heartbreak. More specifically, what do you do when your heart's been broken and your dreams can't come true? If you're new here on the channel, firstly, thank you so much for stopping by. Why not consider subscribing so they stay up to date on every piece of content that we release? Secondly, for the last couple of videos, we've been talking all about relationships, right? Because I want you to get better at relationships. You want you to get better at relationships, and the people around you want you to get better at relationships. Now, obviously, as you know, this video is all about heartbreaks. And heartbreaks are a challenging topic to talk about. In fact, people like me all the time overpromise and underdeliver. We're full of cliche lines that really aren't emotionally satisfying or helpful. And I have a goal: to avoid empty, patronizing promises, because you're too smart for that. You're too important for that. And so if you take nothing else away from this video, here's two things that I want you to take away. The first is this: a broken heart does not mean you're broken. I don't want your broken heart to break you. I don't want it to break your spirit. I don't want it to let you feel like you're broken and you don't deserve any better. We all know people in our lives whose broken hearts have led them to feel that they're broken, and you don't want that. The second thing I want you to take away from this video is that there is a purpose for you, even when your dreams can't come true. All of us, to some degree in life, have an idea of how our life is going to turn out. Some of you might plan that down to the most minute detail, while others of you might plan it out in broader strokes. But all of us kind of have a timeline for our lives. A timeline when we're going to graduate, a timeline when we're going to marry. I want to have kids by that age. I want to have them to start school at that age. I want to start my business at this age. And I think this is particularly true when it comes to the sphere of relationships, because no one envisions their future alone. There is someone else in your future with you. That is completely normal. But as time goes by, maybe some of your dreams came true for a period of time. Maybe some of your dreams never came true. Maybe you're getting to a point where you're realizing that no matter how bad you want it, your dreams just can't happen. And for some of you, that's actually your fault why those dreams can't come true. And for others of you, you're the exception to the rule. You were playing by the rules, but the person you were with wasn't. Now, I don't know what your response to heartbreak is. I know that mine was probably something like, well, since I did, then God must. Since I prayed, since I joined a connect group, since I did all the things that you're supposed to do, then God has to fill up his end of the bargain. And maybe you're not a Jesus follower, but maybe you started bargaining something like that. You said something like, well, because I did, now the universe has to. Or I played by the rules. It's just not fair. Someone owes me. It must be a certain way. Here's where I think following Jesus makes all the difference. Because when Jesus stepped into history, Jesus didn't introduce a version of Christianity that was, if I do, God must. Because that version of Christianity is easy to walk away from. That version of faith is easy to lose. See, when Jesus stepped into history, Jesus didn't offer an equation, he offered an invitation. And the invitation was follow me. Not if I do this, then follow me. It was follow me for who I am and what I have already done. Follow me because I've given my life for you. Follow me because the way you experience life is not actually by holding on to it, it's by giving your life away. And if maybe you're wondering, well, how can I follow Jesus? What does it even mean to begin to follow Jesus in the midst of my heartbreak? I want to introduce you to someone's journey and explore how they began to follow in the midst of their heartbreak. And the person I want to introduce you to is David. Now, even if you've kind of come across this video and you wouldn't consider yourself a Christian, chances are you've heard part of David's journey before. See, David started his life as a shepherd boy. And then one day, a prophet knocked on his door and said, hey, I've got a word from God for you. And the word is you're going to become the king of Israel. The problem is Israel already had a king and David was a boy. And so David kind of went back shepherding as if nothing had happened. Then a little bit later, David goes and visits his brothers who are fighting in the king of Israel, King Saul's army. And they're fighting the Philistine army. And as David is there, he sees this giant Goliath. This is the part some of you probably know. And overnight, David's profile is raised to the status of a living legend. In fact, what ends up happening is David gets welcomed into King Saul's family and he ends up marrying Saul's daughter. Saul thought he was doing a fantastic thing at the time. The only problem is that what it meant was that Saul's son, Jonathan, couldn't become king. And so Saul was stuck in this dilemma. I've invited David into my family, but now my son can't become king. And so Saul loses his mind and chases David out of the home. And so David runs into the wilderness. No wife, no family, no children. Everything he had gone. His future is dark. Next scene, I guess. And David does what so many of us do when our future goes dark and our hearts break. He panics. And in his panic, he flees to this town called Nob. And Nob was a place that was primarily filled with priests. And David runs into a priest that he's friends with and he knows. His name's Ahimelech. And Ahimelech and David has this exchange because Ahimelech's really confused. He's like, why are you here, David? David says, I'm on a special mission from the king. And Ahimelech's still really confused. Like, you've got no water, you've got no food, you've got no entourage. What's going on? And David convinces him. He says, hey, this is such an important mission that I didn't have time to get permission. I didn't have time to form an entourage. I just ran. He goes, do you have a spear or a sword for me? To which Ahimelech says, well, I've got the sword of Goliath. This should have been a moment for David to remember God's faithfulness. But instead, David says, give it to me. I need to have it. And David leaves the town of Nob. Saul finds out about this though. And Saul sends a small army to the town of Nob and he confronts Ahimelech. He says, I hear that David was in town. I hear that you gave him Goliath's sword. And Ahimelech doesn't understand what's going on because he's like, of course I did. He was on a mission from you. He says, no, he wasn't. And to take his revenge out on David, Saul kills every man, woman, and child in the city of Nob. Nothing survives. And David finds out. And David is left heartbroken. Fast forward a little bit, and David's in his 60s now. He's the king of Israel. He has his ups and downs. In fact, it's an incredible story how David ends up becoming the king of Israel. You should read it sometime. But what ends up happening is that David is faced with a very similar dilemma in his 60s. He's made some incredible moral failures. He slept with Bathsheba and lost all moral authority with his children. But his favorite son, Absalom, is about to become the king. David's ready to give Absalom the throne. The problem is Absalom isn't quite happy with the way David's handled a family matter. And so Absalom eventually creates an army of his own, usurps the throne from his father, and marches him out of the city of Jerusalem. And as he's leaving the city of Jerusalem, a few of the priests come up to David and they say, hey, David, we've got the Ark of the Covenant. Now, remember, before Jesus came, the Ark of the Covenant held some incredibly significant Hebrew religious artifacts. And also, they believed, was the place where the presence of God resided. If you had the Ark of the Covenant with you, it was effectively saying God is on our side. And with all that as the backdrop, David makes this incredible statement. He says, if the Lord sees fit, he'll bring me back to the tabernacle. He'll bring me back to his presence. But I'm willing to do whatever seems best to him. Effectively, what he was saying is, I'm done negotiating. I've had my plans, I've had my hopes, I've had my dreams, and I've seen what has happened when I've panicked. I've seen what has happened when I haven't trusted my future to God, and I'm done saying, God, if I do this, you must do this. I'm done with all negotiations. David was heartbroken. He'd lost his future. He'd lost his sons. He'd lost his kingdom. But this time, his response was different. David chose not to anchor his faith to the fulfillment of his dreams. And it's by doing that he extends an invitation that you and I can take up. And this invitation, it's not a one-off invitation. In fact, I think it's a daily invitation. It's an invitation for people like you, for people like me, for people like David, for people who have lost marriages, for people who have lost children, for people who have lost the opportunity to have relationships with their grandchildren. And the invitation is this: would you offer your dreams and your plans to God? Would you say, hey God, I have some dreams, I have some plans, I have some hopes, but at the end of the day, I want to offer them to you. I want you to do whatever seems good to you. In fact, the New Testament teaches us that we can give our worries and cares to God. To say, God, I acknowledge that you care for me, but I also acknowledge that you're God and I'm not. Because the reality is, just because you're brokenhearted doesn't mean you're broken. Even when your dreams can't come true, it doesn't mean that God doesn't have a significant purpose for your life. In fact, the men and women who brought us the New Testament didn't remain faithful because of what they hoped would happen. They remained faithful because of what had already happened. God had become flesh and dwelt among them to show them that he was for them. See, at the center of our story for Christians is the best possible person who lived the best possible life. But Jesus didn't get the best possible end. In fact, he got the worst possible end. And the reason he did that was so that he could say, hey, in the midst of your heartbreak, I know what you're going through. And I'm still here. I still love you. And I still have a plan for your life. So when your heart is broken, don't let that be your cue to run. Don't let that be your cue to try and manipulate God. Instead, let that be your cue to look up, to lean in, and to offer your dreams and plans to God. Hey, thank you so much for checking out this content. We would love to connect with you further and help you take your next step on whatever journey you're on. Below, you'll find a connect link. Fill it in, and we would love to connect with you.